welcome to CCJ 230 with our review and presentation for crime, criminal justice, and criminology. We're going to start with talking about what deviance is and the different theories of deviance. So, first of all, a good definition of deviance is behavior that departs from social norms. And social norms is what's acceptable to the people that we basically hang out with, our peers, our friends, our family. Social norms are norms and behaviors expected and defined within a specific group. And they vary. So you could have norms in the United States that could be very different if you went to different parts of Europe, different countries, different continents. All right, I've given a couple examples as far as what is socially acceptable and how, again, those change not only culture to culture, but group to group. So you can review both of those examples. And social norms not only are difficult because they vary, but it's very challenging to define what a deviant act is. Again, because we all have different morals and ethics and values, as well as social norms. Deviant behavior is behavior that is outside the range of normal societal toleration. So what will society tolerate? If a society, group, or culture will not tolerate it, it's considered deviant behavior. So let's look at Sumner's norms from the least to most serious. The first is folkways. These are usages, traditions, customs, and niceties. We then have mores, which involve moral judgments as well as sanctions such as lying, cheating, and stealing. Then we have laws, which are formal modes of control. They're codified. Here's a look at some of those norms that go into what we just discussed in the previous slide. So you can pause it here and review these in more detail. All right, so how do we distinguish between a deviant and a criminal? Well, most, but not all crimes are deviant. So how can something be criminal but not deviant? Well, for example, jaywalking is not considered deviant by most. That means if you walk across the street where you're not allowed to walk across the street because you might get hit by a car, but it is criminal and you can still be punished through a fine or depending on where you're at because of the fact that it is criminal. However, again, it's not considered deviant. Going 5 miles per hour over the speed limit is deemed acceptable by most. Most people feel, hey, as long as I do no more than 5 over the speed limit, I'm good. However, it's still against the law and you can still be punished. So remember, not all deviant acts are criminal. This could be also cross-dressing, gothic clothing, or lots of piercing or tattoos, because people may see that as deviant, but it's not illegal or criminal. It may not be socially acceptable by most, but that does not mean that it's not accepted within your subgroup or your family, friends, and co-workers. So this is where the lines get really blurry. So how does a deviant act become a criminal act, something that's against the law? Generally, when it becomes socially harmful or dangerous is when it becomes criminal. So, where should society draw that line between behavior that's merely considered deviant and unusual and behavior that's considered dangerous and criminal? Who has the power to determine this? Think about it. In your area where you live or where you grew up or where you live now, who determines what's considered deviant and just not socially acceptable, and who determines what's against the law? Well, first of all, an act has to be criminalized. So a deviant act becomes criminal, and then there's a law written, and it must be passed by a certain legislative body and must have a punishment attached. Or we have what we call decriminalization, where different laws are decriminalized. So once a deviant act is no longer criminal and it's legal, then the penalties are taken away or even reduced. An example from history would be prohibition. During that time where alcohol was made illegal, it was criminalized, but later they reversed it, making alcohol legal again, decriminalizing it. All right, there's a few different views on this subject matter. The first is the consensus view, and this applies that there's a general agreement or consensus among citizens as far as what should be outlawed. So, for instance, if somebody murders somebody and plans the murder, and most of the citizens have a consensus that say that's murder, that's considered a consensus view. This would be the rich and powerful and the poor and indigent work together to agree on what should and should not be outlawed. So it doesn't matter how much money you have, where you live, everybody works together to have a consensus. It's more of a functionalist perspective, and it's supposed to apply the laws equally, but it can often be more of an ideal than a reality sometimes. Next, we have the conflict view. So I think you know where we're going with this. So it is seen as a collection, society is seen as a collection of diverse group of people. You have owners, you have workers, you have the rich, you have the poor, you have students, professionals, younger, older, and the belief is that not all laws are created equally. Groups are always in conflict, and determining whether something is a crime is controlled by the powerful and wealthy in your position in society. And defining what a criminal is shaped by the values of the ruling class and not more of a consensus like in the consensus view. Research does support this theory of harsh penalties exacted on the poor for street crimes with minor penalties for the wealthy and white-collar crimes. All right, we also have the interactionist view. And the definition of crime under this view reflects the preference and opinions of people who hold social power in a particular legal jurisdiction. Do you have that in your area where you grew up or lived, or in your school or your group or club, where there's a certain social power and people in control of that power? Those people use the power and influence to impose their own definition of right and wrong on the rest of society. Because remember, we all have different definitions of what is right and wrong and what is deviant, what is criminal. It also believes that criminals are stigmatized and labeled as outcasts or deviants. All right, so now let's move on over to the media. So what do you think? How does the media influence the public's fear of crime? Do you have any ideas? Is it good? Is it bad? And how does the media influence public policy related to criminal justice? The majority of Americans have limited direct experiences with the criminal justice system, so we rely on the media. And unfortunately, the media won't show, nor do they have the time to show all the different parts of the criminal justice system. So it's a very skewed view of what actually happens, and this can change the public's view of crime and what is actually occurring. Most of what America knows comes from the experience of others, or others they've known in the community, or what they've seen through the media. We also have what's called the CSI effect. Do you know what that is? Have you ever heard of it? It references the popular crime drama CSI. And when the show CSI came out, it's kind of cool. In an hour, they process a crime scene and they solve the crime through the evidence. Unfortunately, it's not real life. And so therefore, people that don't know this or understand this think it's real. And I will often hear Somebody broke into my house. Why don't they come? Dust it for fingerprints like they did on CSI, and within an hour we can find the fingerprints of the person who burglarized the house. And unfortunately, that's called a CSI effect because that's not real life and how it really happens. It can have a significant impact on real issues of criminal justice. And it can be frustrating because if you see something on TV happening, you think that's the way it should be. And in real life, if you become a victim of a crime and you find out it doesn't really work that way, your expectations are going to be off. Also, juries. You may have a jury that believes DNA evidence is readily available and required in every case in order to secure a conviction. Or there should be video proof of every crime committed. And there isn't video proof. So sometimes this will cause many issues in court. Or you have TV shows, a lot out there. I've listed examples of different TV shows. Some are good and try to be very correct in what they show in a fiction-based, not true reality, but others are really, really far off. And if it's a favorite show you have, you may think that's the way it's done when it's really not true. There's a great YouTube video here that talks about the CSI effect and shows you some true things that what TV portrays it as and what it really is. So crime is presented in a reality TV programming also, such as Cops or Forensics Files. So you think, oh, it's reality, so it's real. They're showing real people doing the real work. There's also different documentaries out there on different channels. And obviously the atypical high-profile cases get the most attention. And there's extensive media coverage as well that may have an effect on sentencing or what's going on. The problem with reality TV, for example, is let's take cops. They are going into a police department and riding with officers for months, sometimes 6 months, in order to get one 40-minute show. So the viewer thinks this is a normal night for a police officer, when in reality, that was 6 months of filming to get one night of shows. We also have influencing public policy. For example, agents of the criminal justice system respond to a community's fear of crime by implementing police patrols and getting tough on crime strategies and harsher punishments. So if you have a certain part of a city or a jurisdiction that's having a lot of burglaries, your city municipal government will contact your police chief or sheriff and say, there's a lot of burglaries, people are getting items stolen, people are getting hurt, so we want you to do more patrols and identifying people so we can catch who's doing it, and then the judges will give harsher sentences. So it's amazing how public policy can be influenced by what's going on. All right, now we're going to talk about the wedding cake model of the criminal justice system. There's 4 layers we're going to be talking about. All right, the wedding cake model is really cool because it demonstrates how cases move through the criminal justice system. It helps us understand how cases can be treated differently by the criminal justice process, and it's made up of 4 different layers. So let's talk about the bottom layer. As you notice, that's the biggest layer, and it's called the misdemeanors. So a misdemeanor crime is a crime that's punishable by less than a year in jail and generally a fine. Most of these cases are resolved by not going to trial and they're plea bargained. For example, if you went into Walmart and stole some movies, and you could be arrested or written a citation for a misdemeanor of larceny or theft, and you could be given a court date. Generally, if you talk to the attorney prosecuting the case, that can be plea bargained, or you can get a warning if it's your first time, or you can go to a diversion program. Prison is a place that you get sentenced for when you've committed a felony. But we have what we call nonviolent felonies or lower level felonies. So that, again, have plea agreements, and they don't generally involve incarceration. A lot of times the person may say, okay, you passed a bad check, it wasn't violent, you just didn't have the money to pay for the $1,000 check you wrote for, and you knew you didn't have the money and you weren't going to have the money. So we're going to go ahead and put you through a diversion program, we're going to put you on probation, and you don't do any jail time. Then we have the serious felonies in layer 2, and these are your violent crimes with your criminals that have history. So you may have, a criminal who robbed somebody at knife point and cut their face and stole their belongings, and this is the 3rd time they've done it, and likely if they're found guilty, they're going to go to prison. And you see how much smaller that layer is compared to the rest. And then finally we have the top layer, and this is what you hear about in the media. This is what you see a lot of times on the documentaries on TV. And these are the high-profile cases. So these are the ones that the media give all the attention to. As you can see, it doesn't make up all the crime. Look how little it is. However, everybody thinks by watching TV, if you're not working in the criminal justice system or don't know somebody, you don't understand what it is. So you think that little red top layer is huge, when in reality, it's very, very small. They often involve serious cases where the death penalty is on the table or life in prison is on the table. They're well-known offenders or celebrities. Can you think of an example of one of these layer 1 celebrated cases? All right. Throughout the rest of this class, we are going to be talking about the 3 C's, the 3 major components of the criminal justice system. And they're really in order. It's police or cops, courts, and corrections. So cops, courts, and corrections. So it starts with the cops are called, or a cop comes in contact with somebody. There's an arrest made. It goes out of the cop's hands. It's now in the court's hands. The courts are totally dealing with it. The courts make education and sentencing, and then it goes into the corrections, jail, or prison. So in the rest of this term, I will be referring to the 3 C's: cops, courts, and corrections. So police or cops are tasked with investigating the crimes, apprehending the offenders. They're the first point of contact, but not the middle or last. They're there to protect and serve, constantly reflect on their policies and programs, and it's constantly changing. Your courts, well, look how much this is. So you've got a lot. So I'm going to let you pause. I'm not going to read through this, but please pause here and make sure you read through each one of these 7 blocks and understand what the court's parameters are. And finally, corrections. Again, I'm going to let you pause here to see what the role of corrections is. All right, and then we have the big D word. We call it discretion in the criminal justice. And that means that in the criminal justice system, we're dealing with human beings, and human beings are unique. We're all different. We've all been through different experiences. So therefore, your 3 C's, the cops, the courts, and the corrections, need to be able to have discretion to make decisions based on the situation and the individual human being. It's really a powerful tool, and it can, although the laws and policies are there to guide the discretion, and so it does help us, we need to remember that human factor. And I give an example here, so make sure you pause that and read an example of discretion. And then I have a question for you, which we'll answer at a later time, but I want you to start thinking about this question at the bottom of the page. All right, ethics. So what are ethics? What do you consider ethics? What constitutes ethics to you? And think about the 3 C's of the criminal justice system and all the ethical challenges that are faced. Here's another example, and we will come back to this. All right, now we're going to review the 2 different crime models. We're going to discuss the crime control model and the due process model. Both of these are important. So the crime control model focuses on swift and severe punishment for offenders. There's some some other ones which I want you to pause and read through. And again, please pause and read through these examples for crime control model. And then we have the due process model. This believes that the protection of the individual rights and freedoms is of the utmost importance. So please pause and read the rest of the due process model and the examples. All right, this ends this presentation on Chapter 1.